Okay. Uh, Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you all are from. Welcome to our session. Uh, Welcome to SLEvA session on actor-focused methods and introduction to using outcome mapping and outcome harvesting for monitoring and evaluation. So I think we waited a bit and people will join slowly. So let's move on. Just a little housekeeping rule. We request everyone to turn off your camera and mic until the Q&A session. When you have questions later, we'll request you to turn it on. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat. And also, we would like to request everyone to introduce themselves in the chat. Like, for example, my name is Jigme. I'm from Bhutan and I'm in the environment and climate sector. So like that. So with that, excuse me. To introduce myself again, my name is Jigme Sonam, and I'm here as a co-leader of EvalYouth Asia, one of the many partners for this webinar. So our partners here are PEA, Outcome Mapping Learning Community, EvalYouth Asia, and the uh, EvalYouth Sri Lanka, EvalYouth Global, Evaluation Association Bhutan, and EvalYouth Bhutan. And next, we will have the opening remarks by Professor Hemanthi Ranasinghe, who is a council member of the Sri Lankan Evaluation Association of SLEvA. So I hand it over to you, Professor Hemanthi. Professor.
Please start, Professor Hemanth. Professor Hemanthi, okay? Please start. Jigme, you might want.
Yeah, is everything okay, Professor? Are you unable to unmute? Maybe.
One moment. One
Okay.
moment.
Yeah, we hear you now, Professor.
Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. On behalf of the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, I welcome our speakers, Mr. Simon Hearn and Ms. Mariam Smith of our Outcome Mapping Learning Community. Our moderator, Mr. Jigme Sonam from EvalYouth Asia, and our partners, the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association and EvalYouth chapters. So for those who are new to this webinar series, I would like to talk a little bit about the SLEvA, the Sri Lanka Evaluation Association, which was established in 1999 to build an evaluation culture in Sri Lanka. So over these more than 25 years, it has grown into one of the region's longest standing member-driven evaluation associations governed by its own constitution and an executive council. Our mission is to build a genuine evaluation culture where evidence informs decisions through capacity building, training, advocacy, and professional standards. So our members span from academia, government, international organizations, NGOs, and private sector. So we partner nationally with the Sri Lanka Parliamentarians Forum for Evaluation and globally with the Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, APEA, and also the Community of Evaluation of South Asia, EvalYouth, and Eval Partners. So this is actually one of the outcomes of those partnerships, the today's webinar. So tonight's topic matters because so much of our work unfolds in complex, multi-stakeholder settings. where change happens through many actors rather than just one linear cause and effect. So outcome mapping helps us track how our boundary community, boundary partners shift their behavior over time. And on the other hand, outcome harvesting works backward from real change to understand our contribution to it. So together, they move us from did we cause it to what was our contribution, which was more important. So with that one, you'll hear more about these things much later from our eminent speakers. So again, on behalf of SLEvA, I would like to thank our speakers for sharing their time and expertise today, and also to our esteemed moderator. So I now hand over to today's session to our moderator, Mr. Jigme Sonam, to take the session forward. So thank you very much and enjoy today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor. Before I move into introducing the speakers, we have a quick poll that we would like to launch. So as I introduce the speakers, people can just fill in the poll. It's just to get an understanding of the knowledge level about how much do you know about outcome mapping and harvesting. There is no correct or wrong answers. So as I share that poll, I'll also start introducing the speakers. So firstly, I would like to firstly introduce Mr. Simon Hearn, who is a coordinator for outcome mapping and learning community. And alongside him, we also have Ms. Mariam Smith, who is an independent consultant and also a steward of the outcome mapping learning community. So I now hand it over to you, Simon, and I'll let the poll keep going until 1 minute. We still have a few seconds. So as we wait for the poll, Simon, I'll hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jigme. And thank you for the introductions, and great to be here with you all. As I said in the chat, I'm from the UK. It's a very hot afternoon. We're on our third heat wave of the summer, quite unusual for the UK. So forgive me if I start to sweat out of my forehead a little bit. I'm going to share my screen now. Bear with me. Perfect. Here we go. It's great to be here. This is a great collaboration for us. This is the second time we've collaborated with SLEvA, and we were thankful to be invited to come and share our experiences with outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. You'll hear a little bit more about the history of our organization in a minute, but yeah, the outcome mapping learning community is a global open network open to anybody who's interested in learning more about outcome mapping and related approaches. So today we're going to, so Mariam and I have put this session together for you. We're going to divide it up into two halves. So I'm going to start by sharing some of the origins of these approaches, the core concepts, and also some of the differences between OM and OH, which from the registration form, and we asked you for any questions that you have. We know that's a very common question is, how are these two methods related and what's the difference? So we'll talk through that. And then I'll also then talk you through the steps of outcome mapping. And talk you through some of the practical tools that come with the outcome mapping toolkit. Important to note, this isn't a training, and we're not going to be introducing these methods in the same level of detail that we would in a training. And in fact, we have a training coming up that's going to be 4 days. So you can imagine we're condensing, giving you an overview of what you might unpack in a 4-day training. So don't expect to, an awful level of detail in this. We're only going to skip over the top of some of these methods and give you a taste of what they are and allow you to investigate further by yourself. So we'll have a Q&A after I introduce outcome mapping, and then following that, Mariam will talk us through outcome harvesting, and also talk a bit about combining outcome mapping and outcome harvesting with each other and with other approaches. And then we'll finish up with a second Q&A on that. So thank you also for sharing your experience on the poll. I don't know if we're going to show the results, Jigme?
Do you not see the results? I'm showing it right now.
Oh yeah, maybe the results are up. Great. So you can see we've got a quite a mixed group of you. Some of you, this is your first time hearing about outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. Some of you have already started to read about it, perhaps. And at least one of you out there has already started using outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, which is great to see. Good. So well, let me talk you through then the origins. So the origins of outcome mapping date back to the 1990s, at a time when a lot of donors were looking at some of the lessons learned from development programs, realizing that they need to do more to focus on the sustainability of results. There were too many cases of results just being measured during a program and then not being sustained. So they wanted to commit. So, and a lot of donors did commit to this idea of sustainability. And this kind of predates the OECD DAC criteria that then embedded sustainability as one of the key sort of evaluation criteria of all development programs. But IDRC, which is the International Development Research Center in Canada, was one of those donors that was there at these international conferences, and they committed also to this idea of sustainability. And they following particularly for them, it was the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. Following that, they went through a review of a lot of their program approaches, how their programs work and how they're working with grantees. And they wanted to make sure that they're aligned with this idea of sustainability. They went out and looked for examples of what are people doing that is promising practice that they can learn from. And they came up with sort of two key sources that they wanted to draw from. The first was from the work of a researcher called Barry Kibble, who was working in California in the US, working in the social services sector in the US around drug rehabilitation, working with the unhoused, and a lot of social issues in communities in California. And he'd come up with an approach called outcome engineering. There isn't an awful lot written about this approach, but IDRC at the time, the evaluation unit there, came across this idea and particularly liked the way that it focused on people and behavior. So they took some of the tools and said, yeah, we want to work with that. The other thing was utilization-focused evaluation from Michael Quinn Patton. Some of you are probably familiar with this. Some of you probably use this very regularly. At the time, this is now the sort of late 1990s, this was in the third edition already at that time. And IDRC appreciated the use focus of this approach and the way that it put evaluation users at the center and built learning into evaluations. So they took both of these ideas and sort of melded it into what we now know as outcome mapping. The outcome mapping manual was published in 2001. But what went into that manual was a lot of work with partners. So they were working with grantees of IDRC in Africa and Asia. A few of those programs are mentioned there. They were trialing early iterations of the tools and working with the partners to refine the tools and develop examples. So everything you get in the manual came out of that early practice. And And so following the publication of the manual, outcome mapping became more widespread. It began to be used by others. IDRC had an open source approach. They let the manual be downloaded for free. So people started picking it up. One of those people that started using outcome mapping was Ricardo Wilson Grau, who is a friend and a former chair of the outcome mapping learning community. He sadly passed away in 2018. But he was one of the early users of outcome mapping, and in particular, he was using it with social change networks. And he found that he needed to adapt outcome mapping for that purpose. And in particular, he focused more on the monitoring side of things, and didn't want to use the planning tools, which I'll show you what that means a bit later. So he focused his attention on trying to work as a monitoring tool, as an evaluation tool, and his work resulted in outcome harvesting. And the first brief for outcome harvesting was published in 2012. So outcome mapping and outcome harvesting share a sort of an intertwined history. So following the publication of the manual, the outcome mapping learning community was launched in 2006, initially from a grant from IDRC. And within that community, OH takes form. I mean, Ricardo was a major contributor in the learning community, and he presented outcome harvesting at the first outcome mapping lab in Beirut in 2012. And interesting, we just had our third lab, outcome mapping lab, just last year in Colombo, and some of you might have been there, and we partnered with SLEvA for that event. So this is just to show that outcome mapping, outcome harvesting have a common history, and they grew out of the same thinking, the same sort of need for looking for fresh methods, and they share the same core common concepts. And the main driver behind this is a recognition that the conventional thinking behind a lot of the way that many of us are trained in monitoring and evaluation, to use a sort of results chain like this, where we think through inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. The driver is that this doesn't always work. There are times when this is fine and this gives you what you need, and it's the right approach. But there are other times where it breaks down, particularly when we're looking at social and policy change, because these kinds of changes are complex. We use this word complexity. And what do we mean by that? Well, they involve a confluence of actors and factors, and a range of perspectives that just muddies the water and means that there's not always a clear path. You have to negotiate and look at competing roles. The change is unpredictable in that you don't know when it's going to happen. It might happen within a project timescale, it might not. It's also non-linear in that the effort we put in is not proportional to the change we get out, and change can increase and it can decrease. Change is two-way. As a intervention engages in change, it also changes, and changes beyond our control. We can't just snap our fingers and expect things to change. We have to exert our influence, our support, we can inform change, but we can't control it. So in the face of this kind of complex change, our conventional model breaks down, and it looks more like this, where our inputs change over time, our activities adapt, and our outputs, some of the outputs can land well and some of them don't land well as we'd like. And then we end up with outcomes that emerge in different places that we expected them, and we find, that impact. We don't even. That's really hard to tell from all of this picture. So our idea of a neat linear progression is broken down in the face of complexity. So these two methods, outcome mapping, outcome harvesting, are designed to address this, or designed to work in this environment. They're both described as complexity aware or complexity responsive methods. And they both draw on systems thinking. Sorry, can we mute the microphone, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to find them, sorry.
So they both of these methods draw on systems thinking, which means that they're sensitive to human and organizational systems, and they're looking at interrelationships, they're looking at perspectives, and they're looking at boundaries between systems. And they both help us with this challenge here. So this is a sort of a rehash of a classic cartoon that has made the rounds. But the idea here is that conventionally we can focus a lot of our planning and our monitoring on the inputs and outputs, what we're doing and what we're producing. That's quite straightforward to monitor. And we might also be able to do something at the impact level, set some impact indicators, monitor community health, education attainment, we have a whole range of indicators that we can monitor. But it's what happens in the middle that's often harder to define, trickier to monitor, and conventionally there were very few tools that actually focused on that level. So OM and OH are both squarely focusing our attention on that missing middle that we sometimes describe as missing middle, just because a lot of theories of change just simply lack the detail in that that part. A bit like this diagram here, we just have then a miracle occurs. But outcome mapping and outcome harvesting help us to be more explicit about what's going on in that middle section, the relationships that are happening, that are building, the intermediate changes that help us understand the impact that we're seeing. So OM and OH, they're not really helping us with our sort of inputs and activities and our implementation, and they're not really giving us additional data on impact, but they're helping us to connect the two. They're also both much more about helping us understand our journey, rather than giving us an answer about have we arrived at our destination. The destination is important, and both methods think about where we're trying to get to, but they're really about helping us along that journey. So documenting that journey, helping us to reassess that destination, and improving our capacity to move along that journey. And it's different from other methods of evaluation that are about assessing whether we've reached that endpoint or not. OM and OH is much more about supporting that journey. I guess it's similar to what Michael Quinn-Patton would call a developmental approach to evaluation, which is giving us the capacity to build what we're doing as we're going, rather than assume that we know the answer at the beginning. And both OM and OH embed participatory approaches. They both sort of stand, I guess, on the shoulders of the giants of participatory rural appraisal and participatory research approaches. Those approaches, I think, revolutionized the way that a lot of development programs work, and outcome mapping and outcome harvesting try to embed that philosophy, that way of working in the way that the tools are implemented. And finally, what this sort of thinking helps us to arrive at four core concepts. This is how we've described the sort of shared philosophy of outcome mapping and outcome harvesting through these 4 key concepts. And I'll just talk quickly through those. So the first one is the idea of spheres of influence, and the fact that there is a limit to our influence. And when we're monitoring and evaluating, we have to be conscious of what that limit is, and focus our attention on where we do have influence. So let me explain. Imagine you're running a program. We can describe a sphere of control. This is everything that you have control over, like the resources of that program, the deployment of your staff, the locations that you're going to work in, the kinds of approaches. Are you a research organization? Are you an advocacy organization? Are you offering trainings? Are you engaging in policy making? There's some certain things that you have control over, but you're existing because you care about something in the wider world. There are people, groups, organizations, communities that matter to you. That's your raison d'etre. Why do you exist as a program? Because there's something out there that matters to you, that you want to see improved, changed in some way. Usually a program can't work with everyone that it wants to work with. We might be talking about a whole country, millions of people. We might be talking about multiple hundreds of communities, or we might be talking about a whole institution, a ministry of education. We can't work with those big organizations, those large numbers of people. So there's a limit to our influence, and we call that our sphere of influence. And within there, we're going to find the people that we can work with. We have the relationships, we have the resources, we have the connections and the ability to work with these people and organizations. And so they're within our sphere of influence. And that's where we focus our monitoring in outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. And that's where we're looking for results within our sphere of influence. We can map this also onto the results chain that we looked at earlier. So through this kind of framework, our inputs, activities, and outputs are within our sphere of control. And then the impact, the sort of the higher level changes in well-being, changes in state, changes in environment, society, that's our sphere of concern. And then what's in between is our outcomes, and that's changes in behavior. The second shared concept is that both of these methods are actor-centered. We're talking about people, organizations, institutions, communities, and groups. And we can think about, using this idea of sphere of concern, we can identify those people, groups, organizations who we ultimately care about. And in the model of OM and OH, we can also look at the other actors in that system around those people. So who's trying to influence them, who's trying to support them, who's trying to strengthen capacity, or even like who has control over their environment. So we can identify those, and then some of those are going to fall within our sphere of influence. So those are the ones that we're working with. In outcome mapping, we would call those our boundary partners. And we can start to define a theory of change about working with those in our sphere of influence. And in outcome harvesting, they're the social actors that we've been able to influence some kind of change in, or contribute to some kind of change. And those are the ones that we're going to go to look for outcomes. And often it's about how we're working with these groups or organizations, and then how they go on to work with others that we can't reach. So how do they reach the ones that we ultimately care about? And what we're doing is trying to get beyond stakeholders. This idea of stakeholders, generally, you end up with massive long lists of stakeholders when you do this kind of analysis, and you're identifying anyone who's has an interest in or is affected, and we can't work with them all, or we can't monitor and evaluate all of these. So we're focusing in on what we call the boundary partners, or the social actors in outcome harvesting, and these are the ones that are more crucial to the theory of change, more crucial to how we've been able to contribute to change in the system. The third key concept is that we understand outcomes as changes in behavior. So both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, when we talk about outcomes, we're talking about behavior change. And what you're seeing on the slide here are often the language we use when describing outcomes in proposals, in our reports, program reports, in our log frames, in our monitoring frameworks. And all these things they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. The problem is, though, that they can be interpreted differently. What does gender sensitivity mean to you might mean something different to someone else. Do we have a common definition? Sometimes we do, but not always. Active participation, what does that mean? Strengthened capacity is a classic one. What kind of capacity? So what we're trying to do in outcome mapping and outcome harvesting is to eliminate this kind of language, because it's too vague, it's too muddy, it could mean lots of different things. What we want to get to is who is doing what differently. And when we come down to the level of behavior, it gets much more concrete. You could actually, instead of community ownership, you can talk about how traditional leaders are inviting community members into sessions to give feedback. That's something that you've seen that's telling you that community ownership is increasing. For governmental commitment, instead of just that, you can actually look at the government has committed X amount of money towards this program. So we're trying to get much more specific about who has changed in what way. And then finally, we talk about contribution to change, not attribution. And in both methods, we recognize ourselves as part of the system that we're seeking to influence. We're not separate to it. And as such, we're only often one of many factors that affect change. And both methods recognize that any change we see is not, it's not solely our result. It's the result of a combined effort. So those are some of the similarities and the sort of core, the roots, I guess, the core philosophy of outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. There's also a few key differences that I'll just talk through. The first one is that they look different. There's a different set of practical steps. In outcome mapping, we talk about 3 stages: the intentional design, the monitoring, and then the evaluation. I'll be talking a bit more about the intentional design shortly, because that's where most of the innovation in outcome mapping is. And across these 3, there are 12 steps, each with their own set of tools. Outcome harvesting, which Mariam will talk through a bit later, it has 6 steps in the process, and it's a process for planning and implementing an evaluation, and includes a lot more of the sort of data collection and analysis. And outcome harvesting doesn't include anything to help you sort of plan or describe the theory of change of a program. So that's one of the other key differences, is that the outcome mapping requires an upfront design. It is an upfront design. It helps you think through the intentions of a program. What kind of change do you want to contribute to? Outcome harvesting doesn't require, actually, doesn't even need any pre-designed outcomes, doesn't need a theory of change or an intentional design. You can do an outcome harvesting in the absence of all of that. The scope of inquiry is a bit different. So with outcome mapping, we're focusing on assessing outcomes from boundary partners. Whereas in outcome harvesting, the outcomes can actually arise beyond our boundary partners. So social actors is a bit more of a broader concept to boundary partners. So in summary, if what you're trying to do is program design or develop a theory of change, then outcome mapping is the tool to use. For monitoring, if you're trying to build a monitoring system, then you can use either of the tools or both together. In my work, I generally use aspects of both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting to build a monitoring system. And then if you're trying to design an evaluation or put together terms of reference for an evaluation, then outcome harvesting is generally the methodology that would help you to do that. Outcome mapping is useful, though, as a theory of change tool. So if you need to develop or reconstruct a theory of change, then outcome mapping can help you do that. But in whatever you're doing, both these methods rely on an adaptation to context and combination with other approaches. They're rarely used just by themselves in a sort of step-by-step way. And then this idea of bricolage is how we're sort of coming to describe this process. And Mariam will talk a bit about that later. So having talked a bit about the sort of the origins and the similarities and differences of outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, I'll just go through a few highlights, I guess, of outcome mapping steps. So as I said, the intentional design includes these 7 steps, and they're all sort of answering different questions, and together they sort of form what's called the intentional design, or it's a kind of theory of change. So the first step there is the vision, and it's not just the program vision, but it's a collective dream. It's a collective vision of change, and usually quite sort of visionary. It is like a dream of a future that you quite hard to imagine sometimes, but it's an ideal future. And because it's so ideal, we have to bring that down to the level of something that a program can contribute to. So that's what the mission is in step 2. It's what will the intervention actually do? How will it tackle that vision? What's its contribution? And then we come to steps 3 and 4 that we're going to, I'll talk a bit about, I'll guess get some examples in a minute. But there we're starting to think about, what does success look like here? Who is changing in what way? And then that's elaborated a bit further in step 5, where we set out a progression of change through progress markers. But all that is still just talking about the change we want to see in the boundary partners. Step 6 is then where we talk about what we're going to do as a program to support that change. So what's our role here? And we have a tool called a strategy map that helps us think through our approach to support each of the boundary partners. And then step 7, we put the spotlight on ourselves and ask, well, how are we going to change, and what are we going to commit to? How are we going to keep our intervention relevant, competent, and viable? So those are the organizational practices. And that becomes part of your monitoring system, where you monitor your own behavior change, as well as monitoring the behavior change of your boundary partners. So I'll just give you an example of the boundary partners' outcome challenges and progress markers, because I feel like those are the sort of core of how outcome mapping would help you understand a theory of change. So we talked about boundary partners a while ago, and I showed you that there's this sort of idea of the sphere of influence, and the boundary partners are those actors that you're able to work with, the ones that are within your sphere of influence. So this is an example of a program. It's about forest justice in Tanzania, and the situation is that communities living in forests are finding that their forests are being illegally logged, and the government isn't really doing much to enforce the logging laws, and then missing out on a lot of revenue from forest and sales of timber because of this. And then the people living in the communities are often being coerced into helping illegal logging because there's no other economic activity for them to engage in. So it was a systemic issue in Tanzania, and this program sought to work with community groups across about 100 different communities in Tanzania. So the group that matter most to them are the people living in the forest communities, and around them are other institutions such as the local courts, the village assemblies, the Ministry of Finance is involved, and other development partners. There's other NGOs and donors. And the program identified these boundary partners. So these are the groups and the organizations that the program can actually work with directly, because it doesn't have access to those in the sphere of concern there. So this includes community action groups, village governments, district forestry officials, the Tanzania Forest Service, some of the major wood buyers, and then a group of CSOs that are combined in a working group. So these are boundary partners, and in defining who the boundary partners are, this gives the program the basis for defining its monitoring system, because now it can focus its attention on looking for change in these groups and these organizations, and how they're then working with and alongside others in the system. So for each of these boundary partners, they then went away and developed what's called an outcome challenge. And they didn't just develop these by themselves. They would work with their partners, work with some of the communities in developing an outcome challenge. And what is this? Well, it describes the ideal actions, behaviors, and relationships of that boundary partner. So how is that boundary partner working with others? How are they strengthening or building relationships? And how are they doing things differently? What is their ideal role in the system? So, for example, here, one of the boundary partners for this program is the village governments, and the outcome challenge described then how the village governments are working with the village assemblies, essentially like the parliaments of the village, and how they're working with these particular groups called forest surveillance units, the people responsible for going out and monitoring illegal activity, and then how they're working with the district forest office, the sort of the next level of government up. So the program wanted to see changes in how the village governments were working at these different levels, and so they described the outcome challenge, and you can see this is what they came up with. It's a statement of change. It's like a mini vision in itself. I'm not going to read it through, but you can see that it's not just a simple statement. There's very few sort of technical jargon. We're trying to get away from that and describe a bit more richly what this change would look like. And they're not just doing this by themselves, as I said. They're coming up with these things. It might take a few weeks to come up with one of these. There might be some workshops, and people are drafting and sharing drafts with each other, and it's a shared vision. So the outcome challenge describes then the ideal role, the ideal outcome for that boundary partner. But we also want to know, how are we moving towards this? And this is then when we use the idea of progress markers. Progress markers help us to break down the journey from where that boundary partner is now to where they would be if they reach that outcome challenge. And there's 3 different types or levels of change in progress markers. We describe them as expect to see, like to see, and love to see. So expect to see is about early positive response. So as a program, if we do something to work with our boundary partner, it's about how they're responding to that. It's not something that you're going to celebrate. It's not an outcome that you're going to write in your report and put on your website, but it's a kind of first step, the basics that need to be in place. We then move on to like to see, where we're getting more proactive change, and we're seeing that the boundary partner is starting to do things differently under their own agency. The new skills, new practices, and new relationships. And this is the core of the results that we want to monitor, and often where a lot of the focus is in our monitoring systems. But we also have the 3rd category of love to see, and this helps keep us sort of focused on the sort of more transformative, more ideal change that's closer to our outcome challenge. And we may not get this far because this is quite it does require quite deep change. So we may not get that far, and if we don't, we're not pinning our success on our love to sees. This is the beauty of the love to sees. It's kind of within what we call our accountability free zone. If we don't achieve them, no one's going to come and take away our funding. But it's allowing us to dream a little bit further than we might otherwise do, and allows us also to be surprised. When we're talking about unexpected change, this is where you're able to dream about what some of that unexpected change might be. That you may be a little bit cautious not to sort of pin your accountability on, but nonetheless you want it to be expressed somewhere. So that's what the love to sees do. And then just quickly some examples of that. So for the village governments, at the expect to see level, the village government is reporting illegal activities to the district forest officers. It probably is part of their job anyway, but it's just not happening. So it's kind of like the basic level. The program would like to see village governments regularly holding village assemblies at which feedback on the status of these forest management and village land use plans is provided. So it's changing the way that they're interacting with community members, and providing that sort of level of accountability. And then at the love to see level, the village government is working with the district officials to ensure that no illegal activities are happening on the forest reserves. So you're getting a bit more in depth about actually doing something about the illegal activity. So those are some tasters, I guess, of some of those core methods that are at the heart of outcome mapping. There are others. There's plenty more for you to go off and read and learn more about. But I just wanted to give you a taster of those because really they're the heart of outcome mapping. And we have some time for Q&A. So I think we've probably got about 10 minutes or so. So we can take your questions from chat, and I believe Jigme will help moderate the questions. But just while you're thinking about any questions you have, Some of you also gave us some questions in the registration form. So I'll answer one of those because I thought it was a really good question. And someone asked, what's the simplest way to start applying outcome mapping and outcome harvesting? And especially if this is your first taste of OM and OH, then you might be wondering, well, how can I get started with this? The simplest answer is there's plenty of resources out there. There's a website for the outcome mapping learning community that has a resource library with like 600 or 700 resources going back about 20 years. So there's a lot there. There's write-ups of application of outcome mapping. There's think pieces talking about different aspects of outcome mapping. So there's a lot of places to learn. There's previous webinars that we've had are a great place to start as well. For outcome harvesting, there's also the outcome harvesting community website that you can go to, and again they have lots of previous webinar recordings and resources. So that's what I'd recommend. There's also trainings. There's regular trainings on outcome harvesting. The outcome mapping learning community, partnering with SLEvA and IPID, are hosting a training in Colombo just in a couple of months' time in September. We'll tell you about that at the end. Perfect. So I'll just hand over to Jigme just in case there are any questions.
Yes. Simon, there's one question by Emil Alano. So he's just asking if you could elaborate more on when you mentioned when an organization does not have any TOC that they can use outcome harvesting. So like he's asking you to elaborate more on that, and thinking about how do I preface sell this to a human rights organization using traditional M&E only?
Yeah, thank you, Amiel. That's a good question. So outcome harvesting came out of a situation where organizations, particularly like social change networks that I mentioned, Ricardo Wilson Grau was working with, they didn't have any program frameworks, any what you might call a traditional results framework or a theory of change. Because they work in quite dynamic environments. It's collaborative work. It's not even a single program. It's a group of organizations trying to commit certain actions together. So outcome harvesting was designed in that situation that didn't rely on comparing results against a predefined framework. It's a completely open approach. Some people call it objective free, and you're harvesting what has arisen out of the process of your program implementation. So no matter what was said at the beginning, outcome harvesting will find out what's actually happened.
Yes, there's another question, Simon, if we have time for one more. I see one from, there's two questions actually, so I'll just read them both out to you. One from Bargavi. Do we think about outcome harvesting and outcome mapping as alternatives of TOC, or these are also alternatives of traditional M&E and impact evaluation? I'll just keep it short. And also another question from Ma'am Ritu. For community-led change, where outcomes are hard to predetermine, oh, sorry, it's not a question. She just finds it valuable. Okay, so it's only the first question. Do you think outcome harvesting and outcome mapping are alternatives to TOC?
So I would say outcome mapping is a tool that helps you construct a theory of change. I'm aware that some of you have when you hear theory of change, you think about a particular approach to developing a theory of change. There's putting these boxes on a often on a flip chart, and you're connecting up outcomes together to construct a sort of a chain of outcomes. That's what a lot of people think about as a theory of change. So outcome mapping is a different way of describing the intended outcomes of your program. And for me, that's a theory of change. It's one that's actor-centered and behavioral. Outcome harvesting, it doesn't help you design a theory of change, but when you've done a harvest, you're collecting actual data on the change that your program has contributed to, and you can certainly use that to construct a theory of change. Maybe if you're going into a second phase, or you've got an extension, or you want to work on the next part of the program, you can certainly use that information to help you develop a theory of change. But they're both, I guess they would both be described as alternatives of traditional M&E. I wouldn't describe either of them as comparable with impact evaluation. I think impact evaluation has a particular place in the world of monitoring and evaluation, and OM and OH don't really take that role away from impact evaluation. You can use them alongside or as well as.
Will we move to the next session then, Simon? To Mariam?
I think we can take one more question. I think there's one I can see there.
Is it from Vanilla?
Yes. Yeah, I see that one.
So the question is, in simple terms, outcome mapping and outcome harvesting method is more applicable to behavioral change and practice change focused interventions. Is that correct?
To put it simply, I would say yes. But I think part of the philosophy of focusing on actors and behavior is that, you know, we believe that all change can be boiled down to behavioral change. So no matter what you're focusing on, if you're looking for change in organizations, institutions, communities, groups, that can be expressed in some way as a change in behavior. And for outcome mapping, when we're thinking about a theory of change, we're always trying to boil down to, well, what would the behavior change be? And we believe that there's always an answer. It's always going to be useful to sort of drill down to identify that behavior change. No matter what we're doing, you know, whether we're trying to inform policy change, whether we're trying to improve disaster response in communities, whether we're trying to improve education attainment in rural schools. You can always boil down to behavior change. That's what we believe anyway. And for Ritu asked, is there a place to ask questions around outcome harvesting? Yes, we'll have another round of questions after Mariam has spoken.
Just one thing, Simon. Before we move on to Mariam, I think we have quite a lot of participants right now, and since most of them joined a little late due to the link issues, could we just take a quick group photo before people have to leave later? So before we move to Mariam's session, we'll take a quick group photo. Ahmad, can you take the photo? Are you there, Ahmad?
Yes, please open
Okay.
your
Please, everyone,
camera.
would you please turn on your cameras for a quick group photo?
Yeah, we have 3 page.
Smile,
Page
everyone.
1 and page 2. Then page 3. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So now I hand it over to Mariam to continue on the second part of this webinar. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jigme, and thanks, Simon. It's always nice to hear you share the story and present things. I'm gonna probably repeat a few things, but hopefully that will more affirm some things and feel repetitive. So I'll just see if I can share my screen. And let's see if you're able to see a picture of a garden. Simon, do you want to give me a thumbs up?
You can
Yeah,
see.
wonderful. And so fun to see familiar faces as well on as we took that photo. Some of you I've met before and others are new to me. Good to have you with us. So this is just a very short overview of outcome harvesting. And I know from the questions that you sent in advance that some of you really want to dig deeper. But let's see where we get to. And as we shared, and we're going to share later as well, there are more opportunities to attend trainings and participate in these communities around outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. So this picture I've chosen as kind of the introductory slide. It's showing a garden where I hope you can see you could go and harvest all kinds of fruit that you've maybe planted and others that surprise you how much there is or how little there is. And in my experience, that's what outcome harvesting is about. It's about engaging with a time and space where you've gotten to in a project or a program where you have this opportunity to take the time to harvest. And you may have tried all kinds of things, use compost, there was weather that came and different people planting things. But in this time and space, you're harvesting. So I've also chosen a picture of a mosaic, so these tiny little pieces that make up a picture. And that's also because I feel that's a little bit what outcome harvesting is about as well. It's about piecing together putting together all these little pieces of stories. It might be just 20 if a program or a project is just started, but it could be several hundreds of stories that help you to create a rich picture of the kinds of changes that have been happening and how you as a program have been able to contribute to those changes. It's focused on utilization, or it's based on this utilization focused approach where we really want to see participatory processes throughout all of the steps and it becoming something useful for the work that you're hoping to see. So we'll dive in, give you a bit of an overview and zoom in on some key elements and talk about some of the steps or about all of the steps. And then we'll take time for question and answers. And then you can, of course, go back to outcome mapping if you want, or the combination. And yeah, we'll talk about blending as well, some of the combinations of outcome mapping and outcome harvesting at the end. So let's see here. Am I able to? So I wanted to show this slide. It's just a reminder first of something Simon said earlier in his part of the presentation, that it's a tool that I think is very useful when you're working with complex social change or policy changes. It's not so linear or predictable, and you need these tools to look for that missing middle. And for me, just a good reminder is that social issues are constructed and they keep going. They're perpetuated by people, by social actors, different people who are creating them and perpetuating them. So if we want to monitor and evaluate change in the system, then we need to look at those behaviors and relationships. And these tools, I think, are excellent for that purpose. Outcome harvesting is what I'm talking about now then. So when is it, even though I think it's an excellent tool, when is it excellent? If you already feel that your work is quite predictable, you know how change will happen and what that will look at, you probably need some other tools as well, or maybe prefer to use other tools that are more based on this predictable kind of situation. And that, like if you're looking for literacy scores and that's what matters, numbers of students, those kinds of things. But if you're looking more at the social change, even in an education system, the system, how they're interrelating with one another within the hierarchies or across community level, outcome harvesting can be really exciting to use for advocacy, empowerment, and peace and social cohesion, all kinds of social and policy changes. That outcome harvesting can be very useful. So just an overview of the tool then, and this is mainly just a reminder because Simon has already covered some of those foundations that are the same for both outcome mapping and outcome harvesting. So we do have a special definition with what we mean by outcomes. It's not those desired outcomes, grand statements that we want to see happening in the future, but it's about people and organizations that we're trying to support or that we want to see change in order for the vision to happen. And we're looking at, it can be individuals, groups, or communities, institutions or organizations doing something differently, taking a new action or a different kind of action, having other connections and relationships than they've had before, establishing new practices. They can be talking in another way, having meetings in another way, or policies. We do see policies also as behavioral change. There's a lot before and after a policy happens or is there on paper. So there's a lot of behavior inside policy change as well. Yeah, and we're interested in not just the big, huge ones that you might be valued highly in your reports or websites, like Simon said earlier. We're looking for those kinds of changes that will help us to work with our program and see if we're on the way towards the visions that we're hoping to see. And we're really putting that focus there on influence, that middle area, not the huge impact, but those first steps that are taking place, that missing middle. So I won't stay there at this slide that long. But of course, there are other factors and actors that are influencing that change. It's not just us. So that's why we're talking about contribution and not attribution. We're not trying to claim that all of these changes belong to the program or the project that we've designed. But for me, it's a lot about being aware. We call this webinar, we've named it, we're paying attention to actor-focused methods. And that's what I really love about outcome harvesting as well. You're able to take a systems perspective. You can look at the different kinds of people who are involved or might be able to be involved towards the change that you want to see happening. And that's, so even if maybe a framework or project design has zoomed in on one or two of these actors, in an outcome harvest, you really have the opportunity to look beyond that and see what are the new behaviors when the teachers were trained in some kind of literacy, how a method or something, whatever you're doing. This was a real context in Cambodia I'm thinking about here that I'm showing. But it can be all kinds of things you hadn't really thought about, how the elders were upset when children went to school and no longer had time on the farms anymore, and how maybe the project was able to work and encourage a new connection between them and the school. So that's often not written up in a project proposal because you can't even imagine some of these changes, but an outcome harvesting process can capture those really important changes that are necessary for the vision to take place. So something that's like the center, the core of outcome harvesting is the writing of outcome statements. And I'll talk more about the steps in a little bit, but just to zoom in on this first, outcome statements are like cases. They're mini cases that have 3 important parts for them to be a complete outcome statement. First, it has an outcome description, which is very concrete. It's about someone. So who changed when and where and in what kind of way. and that needs to be quite concrete. So we'd be able to verify it and go and follow up if we wanted to. Also has a statement of significance that helps those of us, especially don't have that knowledge from inside the context, to understand why this is important. Why are we excited about this kind of change, and why should anyone be excited about it? Often you need have that the knowledge from the context or the project to know why this is significant. And contribution finally needs to be part of the outcome statement as well. How were we part of the story, or the program and the project? How were they part of the story of change? And it can be all kinds of other, it can be the government and TV, or it can be other actors as well, and of course often the people themselves who've been excited to make the change happen. But what part did this program or project play in seeing this outcome take place? And of course, all parts of this outcome statement can be really useful for learning and reflection. So we mentioned this before, and Simon mentioned it. Outcomes are not, we're not bound by anything you've put in a framework for a program. You can, and the outcomes are not about the future state. When we're talking about outcome harvesting, we're looking at concrete descriptions, short descriptions of change in the form of outcome statements that we can piece together to be useful to understand how the program has had an influence on the system. So I'll just zoom in a little bit more on outcome statements before we have an overview of the steps and what you can do in each step. And some of you are very familiar, I know, but it's good to be reminded. So this is an example that we've kind of pulled together from several different outcome statements in the context of Africa. So it's just made up, and but just to show the different parts. The first part here is an outcome description, and there we want it to be very concrete and have these different elements. So I'll read the first part first. In June 2024, that's when, during the district council meetings, district council leaders from Chimba district agreed to a proposed set of district bylaws to prevent early marriage. So we have the when there, we have the who, district council leaders from Chimba district. We have where, from Chimba district. And we have a behavior change. They agreed to a proposed set of district bylaws. So that's, you might need to explain a little bit more at times, but essentially you'd be able to pull it, to make it very concrete and quite short, finding that very concrete verb. What did they do? They agreed to a proposed set of district bylaws. So that's an outcome description. And then we normally, if we're an outsider especially, we really struggle to get excited without some kind of statement of significance. So here they explain why this was exciting. While early marriage has been illegal at the national level, it has not been mentioned in local bylaws. And now that there's a policy at the local level, local actors are more likely to engage in preventing it. And the bylaws also required local leaders to establish monitoring and case handling mechanisms to identify and address issues as they arise. This can be an example to other district councils. So here you see some of that wisdom from the local context. You see some theory maybe coming in. It's okay to have a little bit of theory in significance, but not in the top part, not in the outcome description. So here they're showing what they know of the context as well, that the bylaws require local leaders to establish monitoring and case handling mechanisms in that context. So after we've described the significance, we also want to make sure that we've written a good statement about the contribution, how the project contributed, or the program. So it says the program has been regularly meeting with local leaders since 2022 to explore with them what could be done to prevent early marriage. During a meeting together with youth from the area in January 2024, convened by the project, one local leader suggested that they should create bylaws and promise to raise this with the council. So it makes us believe that, okay, there is a link, I think, from the project to these district council leaders from Timba district being able to change their behavior. So when we write the contribution part of an outcome statement, we're not just listing training X and Y. We try to be as concrete about what we think is the linkage and what we think actually contributes to the behavior. So outcome descriptions, we won't go into lots of details here since it's just a short overview, but we're trying to avoid, again, like in outcome mapping, that theoretical and assumed outcomes, kind of jargony language, like increased capacity, empowered and sustainable, and all these words that are thrown around in our sector. But we're trying to be very concrete to say, what did you actually observe or hear about? What was that change there? And we avoid words like increased knowledge and increased awareness, because that's not really a behavioral change yet. But what happened, or what is that sign of increased knowledge then? What did you actually see people do? Did they go wash their hands? Did they stop excluding X and Y from attending their meeting, or whatever it could be? Yeah, and we try to avoid those cover words, like mentioned already, empowered, and they're like summary words, or sometimes they're words we can hide behind. But the interesting thing is really when we can be clear about what we mean by empowered, who did what did they actually do. And we avoid passive verbs, sensitize, received, access, and have. Because if it was someone who received, well, who was the actor? Maybe the story really then is about someone else who started to give, which can be exciting as well. Who provided or who gave access then. So as mentioned, significance helps us to surface values and help the reader understand context. It can be the place where you want to describe how this is the very first thing that behaviors happened, how it's unexpected, for that to change, how it was very difficult, and how people have failed maybe in the past, or whatever it could be. It could be a trigger for other observed outcomes, or negative. And maybe that's a space to really describe how this is a negative change for the context. And we've said this over and over again, but it's contribution and not attribution. We do believe, and it's on this foundation, that we do believe that change happens in all kinds of ways, and it's normally not just one sole cause for a change. We're affected by so many things before we're able to change our behavior. So that will be reasonable in most contexts as well. And remember, it's more than your project activities, your lists of activities. It could be how you kept in touch with someone, messages you sent kept in an informal way, who you employed, who was able to reach that community in a language they preferred, or whatever it could be. Yeah, so remember, outcome harvesting is a collection of these kinds of statements that I've just showed, outcome statements, to be able to create a picture of change, of who, what, when, and where, verifiable, analyzable data. It's not what you might think as a measuring scientific method of how many degrees of this or percentage of that, but it's a bit more like a courtroom. That's why I've got a picture here. Someone in a courtroom, and they're laying a case in front of the judge, sharing their concrete descriptions of what they have seen or heard, and where they were and they saw. Can't just say increased and things are better or worse or whatever. You have to be really concrete in a courtroom, and that's what we hope outcome harvesting. That's what we want to achieve with outcome harvesting. These clear cases that together build the case for where we're at in a program or in a project. So the plural of anecdote is evidence. So just touching briefly on I call them stepping stones because they're not like a ladder. It's not 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You really want to make sure that it's an iterative process as needed to help you move towards usage, and that it's a participatory process. You'll need some kind of design probably in the beginning, but you might need to loop back to design as well as you find outcomes that make you think, oh, we need to dig deeper here, or whatever you need to do. And at the same time, analysis, it's wonderful to be able to do some kind of analysis at some point quite early on to then go back to more analysis later as well. So design, drafting, outcome statements, harvesting, substantiating, analysis, and use can come in different orders, and you can even skip some. Sometimes it's not needed to substantiate the outcome since you've already had a very grounded approach and there's a lot of triangulation and the right people in the room. People feel they're credible and verifiable, and you have that trust in the data to just move forward. I forgot to show my fancy arrows there. So those of you who are not familiar with the steps, these were developed for use and evaluation. If you're going to work with outcome harvesting with monitoring, you might not follow these steps necessarily, but you'll need some kind of design. And then we often start with the process of drafting outcome statements based on what is there in the documentation and among the staff when you meet them. And then there's the process of harvesting outcomes with other stakeholders and key informants who could tell you more and make you more, to give that other insight and exciting perspectives that you need. And then the step of substantiation or verifying and checking and developing outcome statements further with key informants as needed is another step, depending on your budget, how much you want to do that, but often left for evaluation. And then analysis and interpretation and supporting the use of findings are the other steps as well. When we harvest outcomes, so that was step 3, I often encourage taking an open-ended approach. If you do surveys, it can be appropriate to do surveys, but if you're interested in the unpredictable and the things that you didn't expect, I think it's great to have more of an open approach, really listening to what people want to share rather than steering the responses in a certain direction. And our questions are often quite open about what people have seen change in local actors that a certain program or project has contributed to. And we try to design spaces, participatory spaces or interviews in such a way that people are reminded about, or have the time to think also about the changes that have happened in that area or in connection with the program, and helping to capture that and document that and checking back with them. Is this what you said? And bringing people and groups together to share and expand on outcomes that are known to them. So especially in groups and workshops, it's great to use different participatory tools to get conversations going and surface these stories that people know about and help them to feel comfortable to share. And you can do it, of course, you can do it online if you want, or in real life if you have that luxury as well, which is really nice. In the end, or along the way, you'll be gathering this data, and for me, it often ends up in a numbers or Excel kind of form or in some kind of database where we have those parts of the outcome statements, that outcome description, contribution, significance, and then you can add other things as well, source, location, other kinds of program-related ways of coding or whatever you want, which will help you later for analysis as well. Just substantiation we've already talked about, but just want to remind you that the purpose is, for me, I'd say that I often say that the purpose is to have this sense of the users feeling like that they can trust the data. So we want to feel that the data that we have in the database or the set of outcomes that we have, even if we have just 10, is there anything we need to follow up with other key informants in order for us to really trust this data collectively? And that's how I approach it. But again, it has to do with budget and time. That's what Ricardo Wilson-Grau used to say as well. Well, you can add columns in the database, but it costs money. You can do substantiation, but it costs money. So yeah, it's good to have that in mind. And of course, if you're doing monitoring and using outcome harvesting as a monitoring process, you might not find the time, or you need to set aside some time to do that substantiation. And again, these steps can be combined. So in a stakeholder review, it might be that you're harvesting outcomes, but you could also substantiate them. Here we have a flip chart with, this is in Cambodia, writing the outcome statements on the left of that flip chart you see on the table. And then each of the people would go and say if they strongly agreed and why, or if they disagreed and why as well. And if they disagreed, how they would have edited to make it true in their from their perspective. So that's quite a fun way to involve different kinds of stakeholders. This was more at the end of an evaluation process. And then how can you analyze and use the outcomes data? Well, there's so many different ways, and it's so fun if you do involve people, community people, or different boundary partners, different people you've worked closely with in the project, in this process, so that they also own the evaluation results or the monitoring data results, the findings. This is a process in Ghana, I believe. I'm not totally sure. This is my husband's photo. But in this process, after they'd just been harvesting data outcomes during the days before, and they'd cleaned them up, so they felt this is now very clear. And then they printed them out, and they're organizing them in 3 different ways: by actor first, and just seeing who are the different actors doing something. And then they did it by their theory of change that they had in the project, and saw which outcomes relate to what part of the theory of change. And then they also had a process of like most significant change, which outcomes are the most important and why. So that's one way you can do. And normally there's too many ways that you can analyze the data and use it for sense making. But here's another way we've done it on Mural here. We've just taken the titles of each outcome statement, but just taking the titles to give quite a nice sense. If you then organize them by actor, you can see there's a lot of action, new behaviors among community members of different sorts. And there's some that could be really significant among the government health services, for example, and national authorities on the bottom. So yeah, just a way of communicating stories. It's often that's difficult with outcome harvesting and more qualitative tools to get something visual that shows. But yeah, you can also, I've talked about most significant change, maybe not the whole process, but some of those concepts from most significant change, taking that into and blending it with outcome harvesting, or location, or looking at program theory. You can use them to make outcome chains and analyze it that way. You can look at different parts of the project activities, and so looking more at the contribution side of each outcome statement, what seemed to be really significant in making the change happen. You can use different frameworks like a resilience framework or whatever is important in your program, and analyze against that. We'll look at the relationships in the outcomes as well. Who is it between, what's changed, and do some visualization based on that. So But just to remind you, analysis, do it several times and include people. The ones who are part of analysis are the ones learning the most. So if you want people to learn with you, I'd encourage you, especially if you're working quite a lot grassroots, to do it with those who are really part of the program and change makers and others. So just a few reminders. Outcome harvesting can be useful whenever you're trying to help people to change behavior rather than just providing a technical solution and rolling it out. And when you're working with complex social change or policy change. And I'd say the best outcomes are those that can be made into small film scenes. They don't have to be big changes, but emergent changes described well. And the best outcomes are surfaced when we consider change in the whole system of actors. So without being too locked into our spaces of where we think change should happen. And yeah, remembering to have open processes. About contribution, think carefully, generously, but realistically about plausible contribution. I know it's a bit of a balance. But yeah, trying to find what's the role of this program and does it make sense that they would have contributed to it or that you have. And then with significance, tell the reader why they should be interested in this outcome, not just how it connects to program theory. Yeah, and a good outcome harvesting process is a participatory and meaningful process, in my opinion, working with data that people can trust. Keeps utility in mind, enabling a program and all involved to learn and adapt. So that's a bit of a quick run through on outcome harvesting, and just to give you a few little sparks of ideas on what you could do to mix and blend outcome mapping and outcome harvesting with each other. You can start with outcome mapping and evaluate using outcome harvesting. It's very common. Or start with outcome mapping and monitor with outcome harvesting. You could start with outcome harvesting and then use that to develop or inform your outcome mapping or an active focus theory of change. Often we find the fourth one here, heavy touch, light touch. Often we find some boundary partners you may want to have a very developed tool, like the different progress markers from outcome mapping in monitoring with them. But then you might have other boundary partners that you more collect stories, they're unpredictable, and you just collect things in a more, not so developed way as in having progress markers. Yeah, I'll just skip to this one because time is running out. So some other common blends, something we often see is that a project will have some kind of framework or a log frame that they've developed for a proposal. And then you can choose some of those qualitative aspects of the project that you use progress markers for. Or you can even design the log frame around the different types of actors so that it correlates more with an outcome mapping design framework. I see number 2 happening, but I don't think it's so fun because it takes away the learning aspect. But the third one, I think it can be really useful, taking outcome harvesting and then adding, if you want to, and have the funds for a deeper dive into why change happened, the contribution side of things, you can add those kinds of tools to it. And like I mentioned, most significant change is really nice to connect with outcome mapping or outcome harvesting, or taking aspects of it. And then when it's an end evaluation or final evaluation, I often find you'll need some other tools to look more at the scope, the quantity, the literacy scores, or whatever it would be that would speak more to program change. I've taken my time now. Over to questions and answers, I think. Jigme. But use the outcome mapping 5 guiding practices to support you as you blend and choose what tools to use. Make sure they're participatory and learning and all of that, I'd say. Okay, Jigme, thank you.
Yes, I already see a question here in the chat, so I'll just pass it on to you. So it's from Hilmi Ishak. Can we use the outcome descriptions elaborated in an LFA matrix to define the outcome for the OH, outcome harvesting?
So in the log frame, they said they had an outcome description. So that's something they're aspiring that the project would achieve. But now in outcome harvesting, you're looking at what actually happened. Like you're seeing what happened. And some things might correlate with that aspiration. And some things might be showing other directions or just the first sign of that. So in outcome harvesting, we're just looking at what actually happened, those signs of change.
Okay, there's another question from K. Abbott. Do you find that people who use outcome mapping and harvesting are misusing it? And if so, in what common ways?
Mm. Yeah, of course, we all come with our different value systems, right? So if my value system, I put learning quite high and participatory and processes and inclusion high. So if people are not having participatory processes and it's becoming very extractive, I would say that's one form of misuse. But of course, there are other ways, I'm sure, as well. Yeah.
And we have a two-in-one question here from HC. So
Mm.
here they ask that in regards to outcome mapping and harvesting, in highly volatile humanitarian contexts where predefined outcomes often change, how can OH and OM, outcome harvesting and outcome monitoring complement each other without overburdening the field teams? And the second question, in short, is can outcome harvesting produce evidence robust enough for accountability to our donors, or is it mainly a learning tool?
Right. Simon, I'd love if you want to come in as well from your perspective, but I often find in humanitarian contexts where there's a lot of service delivery and really there are some things you just have to get on and do, and you'll probably need to rely quite highly on other tools. But what mapping and outcome harvesting can do in those settings is more that nexus with development, also looking at systems change, actors who probably need to take a role in that humanitarian action, who might be able to be strengthened and take on new roles. So I see some purposes where it would really strengthen, even in highly volatile humanitarian contexts. Simon, do you want to add to that as well?
No, I agree with what you said. I think it's there's a space to use it in preparedness. You know, to work through early warning systems, for example. They often rely on people doing things differently. And then in post-emergency recovery, as you said, like getting into sort of the transition to development, I think there's a space there, whereas it's talking about people's roles and behavior change and institutions.
Yeah, and the second part of the question, I think something about robustness.
Yes.
Do you want to remind?
Yeah, the question was, does outcome harvesting produce evidence robust enough to satisfy or show accountability to our donors, or is it mainly a learning tool?
I think that depends so much on your donor. It can be enough. Sometimes you may need to complement with some other tools. So it's a discussion to have, and what the evaluation is focusing on. And what they've done previously. Sometimes there's an evaluation I'll be involved in later this year where they've had really robust monitoring data already that's more quantity based than other, yeah. But then the evaluation is looking more at the sustainability aspect and the systems perspective, and then outcome harvesting fits really nicely in that. So yeah, it depends. And it depends on the comfort level of your donor as well, what their experience has been with the tools in the past and how people have done it.
Yeah, I see two questions here that are similar, so I'll just clump it together. One is from Ali Nasir, and the other one is from Aaron. So both of them are asking, how do you ensure that the initial outcome statements remain objective and free from staff bias? And what Ali Nasir also mentioned was like, how do you, since it's mainly based on experiences, how do you triangulate or work around biases?
Yeah, so one key is that you're choosing to meet people who are knowledgeable about change. That's where substantiation comes in. So in a case where you feel that is a risk, making sure that you have enough conversations with other people who could be knowledgeable about that happening or not. And I often choose an open process rather than asking, do you agree or disagree, but opening up and hearing, have they seen any change within this whatever area, and seeing if they say it themselves, then I find it more credible than asking straight on. Depends, of course, this is cultural stuff as well, how you do that in each context to get the most honest. Yeah. So yeah, the original outcome statements, of course, people will tell from their perspective, and sometimes it feels like they're opposite. But if you bring them together, you actually see, and the more you hear from different perspectives, it actually is a case. And there's some complexity in that outcome statement that you can refine it towards in the end.
Okay, I think we still have time, but I know it's a little late for most people in the South Asia region. So how about I take one last question at the end here by Andrea. How do I balance between the limited availability of social actors, example, interview partners, and the high demand of their input required in participatory work, especially in remote evaluation settings? Any techniques that are helpful there?
That's such a good question. I think that's great. Yeah, and for me, I think my response, Simon, I'm sure you can be thinking about a response as well. But for me, I often try to, if it is an evaluation that I'm doing in real life, and there's an opportunity to really listen to people without coming with my key set of how many structured interview questions, it can really feel like a meaningful process for people I've met. That's my experience. So when people get to share their stories, they get to say what's important to them. They often feel like their time was valued. But if I come with my 150 very detailed questions where I'm trying to lead somewhere, I don't see the same kind of interest. And yeah, I think that's one of my reflections. Simon, do you want to come in with something else?
I would just reflect that I think it's more of a challenge when the nature of the evaluation is quite different to the way the program's been implemented. But if the evaluation, I guess the values and the approach of the evaluation match the approach and the values of the program, then there shouldn't be much of a problem, because if you've taken a participatory approach in the program, it follows quite naturally that the evaluation would be a participatory approach, and it shouldn't be a surprise to those that have been involved in the program that that's the way that you're evaluating it. It's only a problem really if you haven't taken that kind of approach in implementing the program, and then suddenly you're bringing in this approach that requires, participation requires time and effort and sometimes travel, and yeah, you're suddenly expecting people to participate in that way. It can be quite sort of a jarring switch of approach. And so that has to be managed quite carefully, I think. It's up to the program implementers to sort of communicate quite way ahead of time, to explain that this is the way that the evaluation is going to be implemented. This is what's involved. This is why we want to do it with you like this. Because everything that Mariam said about quality of data is one thing. You can get a better quality when you're involving people in a more participatory way, but also it's about recognizing the value of that evaluation for those participants as well, that it's a meaningful learning experience, a meaningful engaging experience for them. So if you can explain it not as an extractive exercise, but as almost like an extension of the program itself, then I think you will have a better way of sort of bringing in that participatory approach. But there are people that that know a lot more about the, how to bring in and manage these participatory exercises a lot more than me. A colleague we work with, Steph Depre, he runs with IDS, he runs a participatory methods training course. So, there's like a 5-day training course or something like that. So there's a lot of skill, I think, in managing this kind of process. And so if you're embarking on it, you've got to pay attention to that and make sure that you're drawing on the expertise that's out there.
And just to advertise a bit for outcome mapping as well, is you do see a difference if you come in at the end to do an evaluation as an outside evaluator, and people have been involved in designing the vision of the program. They've been in an outcome mapping process or a similar, and there is that ownership. When you come to these kinds of process at the end, there it's just natural, like Simon said. So yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. And as I mentioned in the chat, if there are still any more questions, I'm sure you've seen our social media posts. You'll see the speakers being tagged in there. So don't hesitate to reach out to them, or we have the email loop and you can also reach out there. So now let us move on to the final stages of our webinar. So now we have the thanking remarks by Ms. Erika Lareza, who is the chair of EvalYouth Global Network. I know it's late there for you, Erika, but I hope you're strong enough to go through the thanking remarks. So I pass it on to you.
Thank you, Jigme. Always, I manage, and like this webinar is very, very interesting. And I just wanted to briefly share. I'm currently trying to embark on engaging more communities in evaluation, more community-based or indigenous evaluations, and I've had the privilege of working with a community who's very much heavily exposed to research. And one of the things that we've tried to do is ask the community what kind of evaluation and kind of methodology that you want to do for this process, and more. And within our community, they've named outcome harvesting as one of the things that they liked as a methodology, because it really does put them at the center, puts their perspective, their traditions, their interrelationships, their perspective at the center of evaluation. They felt more valued in that process, and there is much more ownership. So it is really a privilege, Mariam and Simon, for you two to come in here, share your time, despite our outcome harvesting and mapping being such a very complex frameworks to work with, and trying to condense it in like less than an hour each, knowing how much workshops is needed to be able to even grasp the process and do it meaningfully with the communities. So first and foremost, thank you so much again for your time and expertise. And we're, on behalf as well of the audience, Jigme will talk about this, and perhaps Simon or Mariam later on with regards to further engagement that you guys would have with SLEvA. And we are very much looking forward to hearing more from the two of you. So yeah, thank you so much for your time and expertise, Mariam and Simon. And then of course, for this thanking remarks, I would of course like to thank Sri Lankan Evaluation Association for SLEvA for hosting this excellent webinar, and of course to its partners, APEA, EvalYouth Sri Lanka, EvalYouth Bhutan, EvalYouth Evaluation Association of Bhutan, and then of course the Outcome Mapping Learning Community for joining hands to put this together. It's been, it's weeks, if not months, worth of preparation. So we are very thankful for these organizations to always making space to host such meaningful webinars. And then, of course, the production team, Shindu, and like the coordination team of SLEvA and Asia Pacific Evaluation Association, and of course to Jigme for moderating this event, especially the Q&A. And lastly, to our audience for being engaging, for listening meaningfully. And I hope you've learned a lot and you continue to engage, not only after the recording is released, but also with our speakers and of course with SLEvA in its webinar series throughout the year. So thank you so much. Back to you, Jigme.
Thank you so much, Erika. And now to reach the end of our session, you don't need to see me again and again. The closing remarks, yes. Like Erika mentioned, I would like to, okay, I'll leave that for a little bit later. I'd like to again thank everyone, especially our speakers for taking time and all the prep work we had to do for this, the people you see on the screen, the people you don't see on the screen behind the scenes working, Ahmad, Pasidu, people from SLEvA, Apea. Thank you all so much. And lastly, to all of our participants who took a grueling 2 hours to stay here with us. I'm sure it was entertaining, and the questions proved that it was a really entertaining session. And before we end it, Simon, would you like to speak on this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jigme. As I mentioned earlier, we have a training coming up in September. The Outcome Mapping Learning Community is organizing it in collaboration with IPID and SLEvA. It's going to be in Colombo, 22nd to 25th of September. There's the QR code there to get more information, or I'll just put the link in chat as well. The training will get into more depth about outcome mapping and outcome harvesting, and elaborate, I think, a lot more on what Mariam and I have been speaking about today. It's 4 days, so it's a chance to get quite in depth. Mariam will be there as one of the facilitators. We have 2 other of our outcome mapping learning community stewards also facilitating, Jeff Matthias and Glowin J. Mensa. So yeah, have a look at that and hopefully see some of you there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. And finally, once again, thank you all so much for joining the SLEvA webinar series. And as for the slides, the speaker slides, Simon, Mariam, are we going to share it, or people have been asking in the chat? I just wanted to clarify that before we say goodnight.
Yeah, I think we're happy to share. We'll pass them to SLEvA to distribute.
So yes, so SLEvA will collect the slides from the speakers and we will share it in the mailing group that we have with everyone. So I think that is it. Thank you again, everyone, so much for taking time to join us. I know it's late for some of y'all, but thank you for taking the time, and I hope you learned a lot from this. And as Erika mentioned, hopefully it doesn't end just with the recording and the slides, and you'll still keep following up. And as I mentioned, you have the speaker socials. They can also share. I'm sure they shared it in the chat, so you can give them a follow. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.
Please stop the recording, Ahmed. Thank you very much, everyone.
Stop the recording.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.